Unfound is a missing persons podcast started in September 2016. Over the course of its first year, Unfound has striven to give listeners the most complete view of the missing persons community, interviewing family members, reporters, detectives, nonprofit organization leaders, and private investigators. Along the way, Unfound has even generated new leads in some of its cases. Today, you get to hear the interview that started it all. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. And on the phone now, I have Mrs. Mary Lyall, the mother of Suzanne. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's start with you just talking a little bit about Suzanne, what was going on in her life at the time, maybe a little bit about her upbringing, her education, her interests.
Okay. Well, Susie was born in April of 1978, and right from the beginning, we kind of knew she had a lot, of intelligence. My husband always said there was, he could see that in her. And as she, grew up, by the time she was about 9 years old, she was writing poetry, and from writing poetry to wanting to, she started to hear about computers, and I think our first computer was a Texas Instrument computer, and she really was fascinated with those. And she, really got into the computer area, and, eventually, would take computers apart and rebuild them.
Yes.
And she.
And how old would she have been at this time? A teenager?
Oh, she was a young teenager, maybe 13, 14 years old. She was the only kid in school who actually knew anything about computers. At the time in school, they were just getting one into the library. It's a fairly big school district, but the libraries in the different schools had one computer, and if it would break down, nobody knew anything about computers, and they would call Susie to come and see if she could fix it, which she usually could. And she really she had people around her all the time, just fascinated by the fact that she typed so fast, and she could bring up all sorts of information on the computer.
Where do you think that she got this from?
I have absolutely no idea.
No idea?
It just seemed to come, and like I said, she was into writing poetry, so she was using a typewriter, and and then of course when a computer came around, she could type all that information out on the computer, and save all her poetry that way. So she really had a lot going for her. When she was in high school, she was on the Honor Society. She was a very bright girl, and
it's interesting to me that she seems like she has this, what would be I don't know if the word is a dichotomy of, on one hand, being very technical, but on the other hand being very I would, maybe if I could say this, artsy fartsy in poetry, because I could say that because I'm artsy fartsy, but really having a passion for the arts, but having a passion for computers as well, which is a really unique combination.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's basically what she was, and we could never understand, even as a real young child, some of the poetry that she would come up with that was, just so far beyond her, years. I mean, comparing things like. When it rained one day, and she wrote a poem about rain and how the rain sounded like thundering hoofs of a horse, coming down the driveway.
Right.
Just just really, far out ideas of how she put this all together. We just don't know where it came from. One interesting thing was one day she was taking a shower, and she jumped out of the shower. She had soap in her hair, towel wrapped around her, and she ran down the hall, and I said, "Where are you going?" And she said she just got the idea for a poem, and she had to write it down before she forgot it. So, even doing that would be, poems were just coming into her head all the time. She even wrote poems about the places that she would write a poem. One time writing a poem on the back of I think she had some bunion pads or something. It was the only paper she had. So she wrote a poem on the back of that. Just things like that she could, really came to her. She had to write it down. Backs of napkins. I mean, it was just, it was constantly coming into her. And after she disappeared, my husband and I went through her books, which were tons of paper, and I couldn't believe all the poems that she wrote. I could not believe it.
She was a young woman who was very in touch with her feelings and could express them, not just not just speaking, but writing them down, which is a particularly unique talent.
Yes, yeah, that's where she was coming from, and we don't know where she got it from, but it just seemed to happen. And
well, having a wide, diverse array of interests like that is usually a sign of good parenting too. You should know, so you should be commended for that. But I'm sure you're happy, though, that she chose to go into computers for school instead of poetry, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Right.
I always wondered, if a poet could make it in this world. And I know there was a time when the school would publish, art type things that children had done, actually, I'm calling them children, but high school students would do art type work, and in order to, some of the stuff that she wrote, she said in order to get it published in this booklet, which was a once-a-year booklet, was kind of on the dark side. For some reason, that's what kids like to read.
Yeah.
So, some of her poetry at that point was very dark sounding, and when I spoke to people who worked at the school, they said they would get booklets from all the different schools, and most of the booklets were very dark, just that's what kids were like.
Teenagers.
Yeah, good teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers.
Right.
So she goes to school, but she ends up going to one school, and what was that school again? She transferred.
Oh, she went to SUNY Oneonta, which is about 100 miles from where we live, kind of, down in kind of mid-New York. And when she went there, she took a computer science class, and by the end of the year, she said that it was, really she could teach the teachers.
Yeah.
They didn't have the knowledge that she had at that point about computers. So she decided that she would transfer to a bigger school, and that's when she came up to SUNY Albany, which, maybe 35, 40 miles from here.
Right.
So she moved a little closer. I was kind of against it. I really didn't want her to move closer, but the classes that she could take at that school were, a little more challenging. I think that's what she was looking for. Something that.
That's interesting. You didn't want her to move back closer to where you lived? That's interesting.
I really felt like I had two other children who, both of them went away, to school, one 5 hours away, one 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours away. I just really felt like their ability to grow a little bit was to be able to be further away from home. With her being so close to home, it was not that I didn't want her.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
But with her being so close to home, I just felt like she wasn't going to experience the, learning how to live out on the world on your own a little bit better.
Yeah. See, my mom to this day is still the opposite. If I could have gone to college in my bedroom at home in 1989, she would have So
Yeah.
once again, that's why I had to ask you about that. How did she feel? She'd just be a few years younger than me. I was born in 1970. She would be a few years, like, what year was she born again? 70?
78.
78.
1978.
So she was born the same year as my nephew. Okay. So I know even at the time, even the early 90s, mid 90s, computers for women was still kind of in its infancy. How did she feel about having these classes and having an interest in something that was so male dominated?
I don't know. I think she just felt very good about knowing what she knew, and she was very helpful to anybody who asked her if they could, if she could help them, with their problems. And many times, after a class, somebody would come up to her and say, geez, I'm having trouble with a certain thing. Can you help me out? So I think she felt good about that. I really, I know she did. That she was able to, help other people who, with her knowledge.
Yeah, because the way I remember it, I think that women going into engineering and computers and math is much more common now. But I think at the time, a lot of women stayed away from this stuff. They might have had the interest, but they didn't because it was such a male dominated industry. So I think that once again says something that very unique about her. How did she do at Albany? Switching to a tougher school. How was she doing?
I don't think she. The thing is, I think with being in college, when you go to a college, you make friends. In your freshman year, and you kind of stay with those friends throughout the whole schooling. When she switched, she had a little more trouble, making close acquaintances because you don't have that orientation that you would have when you start out as a freshman. She was already a sophomore, so she didn't really have a lot of close friends. She had friends, but, nobody she could say, this is my closest friend. I met her, last year. So I think she had a little more trouble when she came up. I'm wondering if she, made a mistake, coming closer. Of course, we know it was a mistake.
Yeah.
But, just the fact that she, needed some.
I mean, she was, let's just put it this way, she was getting passing grades and all the...
Oh, yeah,
okay.
She was. Yeah, no, she didn't have that problem. The problem was, basically, the fact that it was harder for her to fit into groups.
The social life, the socializing that goes along with college. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I guess that brings us to the man that she eventually did meet, and through a computer club. Explain to the listeners how that happened with meeting Richard Condon.
Yeah, she actually met him before she went to college. She was about 11th grade and heard about this computer group that would meet once a week at a local restaurant, and convinced my husband to take her to this place. And so my husband would take her down there, once a week to meet with these people. And some of them were older. That was something that bothered me a lot. And there were quite a few, male type people.
Of course.
More and. So actually just recently became acquainted with somebody. I didn't, but I found out about somebody who was the person who actually introduced Suzanne to her boyfriend, the one she finally wound up with. Yeah. And the reason that he did was because Susie was interested in learning how to do some it's not working here. Learning how to do computer programming.
Okay, and like a particular computer language or something like that?
Yes, and she did not know how to do that, and she had heard that this guy who eventually became her boyfriend, was an expert at programming, and so he introduced her to this guy's name is Rich. Introduced him to Rich, and that's how they got acquainted, was because he taught Susie some computer programming, and she used. We all use Microsoft Word. Everybody uses Microsoft Word, but she and Rich got into using Linux, which is a lot more difficult to program. So that's how they really got to know each other. And he thought, wow, he was pretty in tune with computers, and to meet up with a girl that knew so much about computers was kind of wow.
So that was the level on which they identified with each other. That's where they really bonded, I guess you could say. Was with the computers. How long was it now? He was how many years older than she was?
About a year and a half now.
Okay,
he was 1 grade ahead of her. When she was in 11th, he was in 12th. So.
And he was organizing this at this restaurant at that early age.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was another guy who was building computers and tearing them apart and making bigger and better computers at the time when they weren't. I mean, our cell phones now have more memory than those computers did. But,
yes.
That many years ago, 18, 19, 20 years ago, we're talking about, top-of-the-line computers that they were putting together.
So how much longer after that did they become a couple? Was it when she went to college, when she went to Albany? Because he ended up going to the same school.
He actually never did go to the same school as she did.
Okay.
He went to a Catholic boys' school in the area, and she, of course, went to a local high school up here in Ballston Spa, where we're from. But when he went off to college, he went to RPI, which Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, and Susie was still in high school. And then the following year, she went to Oneonta, which, like I said, is about 100 miles from here.
Right.
So they never went to the same schools together. They just got to know each other, I think, through that, those meetings in the restaurant. And then once, they had those meetings, that's how they,
that's how they started dating.
That's how they started dating.
And at the time that Suzanne disappeared, how long had they been a couple? And I know there's some. We'll get into the particulars of that, but how long had they been a couple?
I think they'd been together about 2.5 years, maybe, because she started dating him sometime as a junior in high school, and then she disappeared as a freshman or a sophomore in college. So about 2.5 years or so.
Okay. We're going to come back to her boyfriend in a moment, but before you came on the air, I went through the facts of her disappearance and what she did that day and some of the times and things like that. I just want to clear up a couple things because here we are in 2016, and I just want to get straight a couple facts. First of all, I'm sure if people are familiar with their daughter's case, they've heard about the man in the baseball hat that appears at that convenience store around the time that her ATM card was used the next day. What can you tell? That guy has been exonerated, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
Okay.
And it took a long time before the police actually located him, but they finally did, and pretty much decided, that's what they told me, is that, anything that they found out from him, didn't put him in that place, or didn't put him taking Suzanne. So that's really all I can tell you about that.
Right.
I don't know any more than what the police told me.
Right. Well, and I just want my listeners to get it straight from your mouth because, like I said, there are still sites out there that maybe haven't been updated in a while, or they don't know some of the news that that can kind of put people off in maybe the wrong direction. And of course, if the police say that somebody's not being looked at anymore, then we want to make sure that we put that out there. The other point is about her name tag from her job that she was at that night. It wasn't seen near that bus stop where she got off for about 2 months later. Like she disappeared in March.
It was like early, I would say late April, early May.
Okay.
And they found that.
Okay. And was that name tag, where it was found, would that have been on the way from the bus to her dormitory, or would it have been in the opposite direction?
No, it was found pretty much right where the bus left off the passengers that night. It actually, that was a very mild winter. We did not have very much snow that winter, and anytime it rained, anytime we had any precipitation, it was always kind of freezing rain. But right after, and there was no snow on the ground when Susie disappeared. It was very clear, just, whatever.
Okay.
But that week after she disappeared, there was a small snowstorm. And I would say maybe 4 or 5 inches, not much. And when the college plowed that parking lot, it had salt and sand or whatever on the parking lot, and they pushed that up over the curb. There was like a curb where the bus left the passengers off.
Yes.
And when they pushed the salt and sand or whatever up to the top, it went up over the top of the curb, and it was there that badge was found. Now, from what I gathered from the police, they said that right after she disappeared, of course, they didn't go out to look for about 3 or 4 days. But they said right after she disappeared, they walked that parking lot pretty much shoulder to shoulder and did not find anything. All right, this is where the confusion comes in. They found nothing. Now, I'm saying that where this badge was found was up on top of this pile of sand and salt or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, like I said, almost a month and a half to 2 months after she disappeared where they found it. And could somebody have come by and dropped it? I don't know. The other thing about this was this particular badge was one, according to the place where she worked, they were not using anymore. They were using a hang tag where you put it around your neck on a
lariat
type thing, and they had the badge on that. This one was a pin badge, and from what we found, the police showed us the back of the badge. The pin was very rusty. Well, I think you could put something out, in a day and have it rust.
Right,
pretty quickly.
Especially cheap metal like that, sure.
Yeah, cheap metal, so they were saying, well, it was here for a long while. Well, we can't decide that it was. It was cracked. I would say that, maybe a car drove over it or something, so it was cracked. But other than that, there wasn't really much else we could find out about that badge, other than it was found by 2 students who were walking through the parking lot, and they found it. And they first picked it up, thought it was a credit card, because the size of a credit card, and threw it down. And then the one girl picked it up and said, oh, there's a girl that's missing. Let's look at this. And they looked at it, and there was her name. So,
was it Suzanne's habit to, like, if she left work, would she have just left the name tag on, like, to go home? And
and some people,
I mean,
would you that all the time.
Okay, would you say that was her habit to do that probably too? Because some people, they're going to take it off. Well, I don't want somebody to know that I work at this store, or
Well, the unusual thing about this, and there's people always say there's always something we're missing here along the way, but the unusual thing is the fact that she never liked to wear the clothes that she had to wear to work. Out of work. So she would bring a bag of clothes, and it was like a tan-colored pants and a certain colored shirt. I can't remember what it was, but it was the logo of the company that she worked for. So she would bring them with her, change at work, then once she got done with work, she would change the clothes back and put them back in a bag and carry them home or carry them back to the dorm. So if she would do that, taking the badge off too.
Right.
So that's always been a question high on my list.
Yeah.
But I never got any good answers to that.
Do you have knowledge if she changed clothes that night after she?
Oh yeah,
she did.
Oh, yeah.
She absolutely did. Okay.
She absolutely did. The man that she worked for, her boss at the time, said that Susie would come in a little bit early to work so she could get into her work clothes, and always started a little bit early, which meant that she could leave 5 minutes before the bus would come. If she'd leave 5 or 10 minutes, before the bus would come, and change back into her outdoor clothes, basically jeans or whatever the kids were wearing at the time. And she would take those clothes off. She didn't want to wear those clothes out. I don't know why, but that was her habit.
Well, maybe a fashion, statement of some type, self-conscious about her fashion or something like that. I think I've known people I think I've had 1 or 2 jobs like that, in my life where it maybe has like the name of a store or something on there, and
like McDonald's or something. You don't want to wear your McDonald's uniform out, advertising the uniform.
Yeah, maybe not. But just going back to the name tag, so it's possible that night the name tag falls out. It sits there somewhere around the bus. She disappears. It sits there for a couple days. Nobody notices it. And then the storm comes. The snow gets pushed away. The name tag gets caught up in the snow. And then these months later, or 8 weeks later, the snow melts. And then the name tag appears.
It shows up.
That's possible.
That's possible.
Okay. Great. I just wanted to get that on the record. Okay, great. Let's move on once again. I guess back to the boyfriend. The next day he calls you and tells you that Suzanne has disappeared. Yeah,
he says, how did he word it? He worded it so that it didn't sound like, geez, Susie disappeared. What are we going to do about it? It wasn't like that. It says, did you know Susie didn't come home last night or something like that? And it was like a shock to me because I was getting ready. My husband was reading a newspaper. I was getting ready so that we could go to meet my son. It was going to take me out for my birthday, which was the day before Susie disappeared. And so he called, my son said, we'll go out for lunch. And so I was getting ready. The phone rings, and he says, did you know Susie didn't come back last night? It was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I was like a little bit in shock because, why didn't you call me last night? And why are you saying that? And so I gave the phone to my husband, and my husband got the information from him saying that, Susie didn't come back. He had tried to get into her computer, which he did. He got into her computer and, looked at different emails or whatever.
Right. We'll get into that. We'll get into that too. But we'll get into that. But he calls and says, and then you hang up the phone and you go to Albany.
My husband went right down to Albany. Yeah, I stayed here because I thought, if there were any phone calls, somebody would call me and I'd be here. That was before, cell phones were just coming in, so we didn't have the cell phone.
Yeah.
But, I here, and Doug went to Albany to, go and talk with the police because the police weren't taking any reports from just a boyfriend, and, they were trying to convince us that, maybe she just came home and she went and stayed in somebody else's room, fell asleep, and, she'll show up again. Basically, they poo-pooing the whole thing. So,
let me ask you this, if you know. Did Suzanne and Rich have, I'll admit I'm single at 46, but I know most people who are in relationships or married, they have kind of like a schedule. They call people at certain times of the day, maybe after they get off of work or something like that.
Yes.
Would it have been Suzanne's inner habit maybe to call him when she got back to her dorm or something like that?
Yes, that was the habit, and that
Okay.
was basically the reason why he did not contact us right away. When she got back, she usually got back to her dorm about 9:45. She left work at 9:30 or 9:25 so that she could run to change her clothes and then catch the bus back to the campus. And the campus made no stops between the mall she worked at and where she got off at visitors parking lot, and it was about a 10-minute ride. And so she made, when she would get back to her dorm, which would have been about 9:45, she would make a phone call to him, or she would email him to let him know that she was back. And she didn't do it that night. And he started, according to her roommates, or their quad mates, because this is like a four-room quad that she lived in, and according to them, they hadn't heard her come in. She normally would come in, and she had a lot of keys on a key fob, and it would hit the door, and they could hear the noise when she walked in, and they never heard that. So, but all they heard all night long was the phone ringing. The phone kept ringing and ringing because he was trying to call.
So there is a record of at least somebody trying to call her on her phone that night, trying to reach her, figure out where she was. We don't know necessarily if it was him or not, but somebody was looking for her.
Somebody was looking for her.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, so the next day, don't quite know about the ATM situation yet, but you start this search, and does he take part in it?
I don't know what he actually, I think he might have tried, getting a hold of the police. I don't think he ever really went to the campus. My husband went to the campus, and he called around 9:30 in the morning, which, we're saying 12 hours after she was not heard from. So we've got 12 hours gone already, and so Doug goes down to the campus, and it takes him, got himself right down there, and he was down there by maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. And he went right to the police and, talked to them. In the meantime, I thought, what do I do while I'm sitting here? And I thought about her credit cards, and I thought maybe, because all her credit card statements would come to us. And she had maybe 2 credit cards. She didn't have a lot. But they would come here. Her bank, book, I knew what she had in her bank account because all the statements would come here. And so I started to call. I called because I knew she had an ATM account. So I called it. I think by the time I figured that all out, it was around, 2:30 or about maybe, 3:15, I'd say, that I got a hold of an ATM agent for her ATM card. And I was talking to this woman on the telephone. She was in Seattle, Washington. And I'm looking at the clock, and about 10 minutes before, she says to me, I think that card just got used.
That had to have been a crazy moment for you. That had to have been a really surreal moment.
Was.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, where did it get used? And she said, I can't tell you that because this particular company was Cirrus, and Cirrus gets their receipts the next day. At that time, I don't know what they do now, but at that time, all the receipts for the day before would come into the company the next day. And she said, I can tell you tomorrow morning, but I can't tell you right now. And I said, well, can you tell me anything about it? And she said, the PIN number was a direct PIN number, direct hit on the PIN number.
So, and what that means is that somebody used the card and somebody got the PIN right the first time.
Right the first time.
Nobody tried to mess around, hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5. It was whatever it was the first time, boom.
The first time it was the right PIN number.
Okay.
So I was, like, what else can you tell me? She says, I can't tell you anything else. So first thing the next morning, this woman, like I said, Seattle, Washington, she called me up, and she told me that the receipts were turned in and $25 was taken out of the account. Mm-hmm. And that was it, which was kind of the usual thing that $20. I'm sorry. $20. Okay. Was the usual thing that she had taken out. And she had taken out the day before, the day she disappeared, at around, I would say, 4 o'clock or 3:30 or 4 o'clock, from a bank across from the campus. She had taken 20 out. And then she got to the mall where she worked and took 20 more out at the mall. So, maybe to buy supper, I don't know.
Now, I'm going to ask you this because, once again, this is going to become, for the listeners, this is going to become relevant later. Are you sure she used the card both those times? Definitely.
Yes, I believe that, yes, because at the time, there was a camera at the bank where she took the first 20 out. And when she got to the mall, I believe there was a camera in the mall at their ATM machine where she took the second 20 out. Okay, so they saw her there and both times. Okay. So it was her. But when they got to the place where the card was used
on March 3rd.
On March the 3rd, well, I was on the telephone with the ATM person. Mm-hmm. The surveillance camera was not over the ATM machine. Right. It was over the counter where the cash register was for the store that the convenience store that was used.
So the camera is, once again, for the listeners, what that means is that the camera was pointed at the registers, probably because the owner of the store might have wanted to make sure somebody wasn't ripping them off. In contrast to, like, today, almost 20 years later, where it seems like every convenience store has, like, 10 cameras all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. There was only the one camera over the cash register in that convenience store.
And where was the ATM in that store?
Just inside the doorway. So when somebody would come in, they could go right to the ATM machine, do their business, get money out, maybe go to the counter and buy what they wanted to buy and have the cash on hand. Right. That particular machine gave cash. Okay. Some machines give script, but that one I was told gave cash.
Right. And this, by the way, this is also how the guy with the Nike hat got involved, because he was in the store right around the time that ATM spit out the money.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's how that all ties itself up together.
And the reason that you saw the Nike hat was because the camera was overhead, so it was kind of a bird's eye view. So all you got was the hat with the brim and maybe a little part of this guy's nose. Really no facial, familiarity. You couldn't get, there was no face there. I mean, it was basically his.
But the police finally found him somehow.
Finally located him. He had a, what did he have? A jacket. He had, it was a winter jacket that was a particular brand, and that was another reason that he was identified with, because of the jacket, the hat. And it was months later when they finally identified him. It wasn't like overnight.
And that's...
it took a long time to find him, but they did find him.
They did find him. That's why it's weird 18 years later that's the name of the make of the jacket.
The company of the jacket. Yeah.
Right. And but going back to, you said it took them a while, but still you'd think 18 years later that, some of these people would clean their information up. How did her boyfriend find out that she was missing? He called you, but how did he find out?
Because she didn't call him, so he tried calling her. Okay. And he kept calling her, claiming that that's what he did. Mm-hmm. And, I think my husband asked him, well, why didn't you go down there? And he said he didn't really have an explanation. But when the police talked to him, his explanation was his alibi was he was playing a game on the computer with one of his friends. And his friend...
when she disappeared.
when she disappeared,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And this friend identified him by the fact that he said, I knew all his moves. In other words, the moves on this particular game that
It
he
should.
was playing.
How far, and we maybe need to clear this up too, how far did her boyfriend live from the Albany campus? He didn't go to school there, but he lived close.
Yes, he did. He lived maybe, I would say, if you got on the Northway, probably about 10 to 12 minutes away. Yep, not very far.
Okay, getting back to the question of how he found out. So he just took for granted that because she didn't pick up the phone, not even the next day, that she never came back? Or did finally somebody pick up the phone in that dorm? Or did he drive down there and find one of her roommates or something, and they said, no, Suzanne never came home last night?
No, he just decided that she was missing. That was what his...
Okay.
That's right. You know, just talking to you about this really brings a lot of this back, you know. I mean, these are questions that need to be asked from the police again. You know, we need to go over this and over this.
Yeah.
There's a clue somewhere.
Well, I ask the questions because either I don't know them or haven't read them, and I don't want this. I don't want you to. This is not a point of trying to relive this over again for you. You know, that's not why I do this. But
no,
I'm just asking questions as you're answering them. You know, just a thing that pops into my head. Once again, you can answer it. Great. If you don't know, that's fine too. You know, that's fine too. Now you did a show. Now we should say something before we continue. There is no suspect in this crime. Nobody's been, there's a woman that I've interviewed, that's going to be on a future show. And she always likes to say, nobody's been included, nobody's been excluded in the disappearance of Suzanne Lyall. Okay, that is a fact. All right, that's a fact. We have to establish that right now for the listeners. However, you did a show called Disappeared back in 2011, 2012, where you were very, let's put it this way, there was a strong feeling there that you thought that her boyfriend had something to do with it. Okay, now can you talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about it. You know, for a long time the police pretty much said don't say anything, you know. Well, you know, 18 years have gone by and I just got to the point where I just couldn't hold back anymore. But, you know, just the fact that here was a guy who claimed to be her boyfriend, lived about 10 to 12 minutes away from the campus, realized that she didn't come home that night, and didn't drive down to find out where she was. Most people would say, yes, you know, if it was my boyfriend or girlfriend, I'd want to know where they were, you know. I want to go check, you know.
Yeah.
Most guys would do that. And
now, do you think that he didn't, now, this is once again another point that was, you know, that we've talked about, you know, when we've originally talked. Could it be the reason he didn't go down there is because maybe they weren't a couple anymore?
Well, I was wondering that also, but, you know, from the fact that he did call the next day to tell us, you know, that she didn't come back to her room, so they could have, maybe he still thought they were a couple. I thought around Valentine's Day that she gave him the Dear John letter, but we never knew for sure. You know, and that was only 2 weeks before she disappeared. And I know that every time she tried to break up with him, he would just get very emotional and throw a real fit about it. So, and she was the kind of a person who couldn't take that kind of emotion, you know, that she always felt sorry for, you know, the underdog, basically. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if he had her pretty much, you know, under his thumb.
Do you think that that is something that she would have explicitly told you? Hey, Ma, you know that I broke up with Rich last week. Do you think that was...
I knew there were times when she tried, you know, and she didn't actually tell him in person. She would write a long letter and then hand him the letter, and he would get home, open the letter, and about 10 minutes later you'd hear the telephone ring and you'd hear her on the phone, you know, arguing with him, and eventually, you know, they would get back together again.
So this was a relationship that had its ups and downs.
It sure did, yeah.
Okay, okay. So once again, we just have to establish that he's been interviewed by the police, maybe not recently, But at the time, maybe a few months after, whenever, he's been interviewed. He has seemingly a decent alibi with the video. Of course, nobody saw him.
No.
But he's playing video games. This friend, whoever he is vouching for him. That alibi has never been broken.
No.
Okay. However, given that he is a computer expert, just like Suzanne was, maybe there's the possibility that he could have maybe programmed the computer to do something, because there are,
That's always been my contention, is that he programmed that computer to play that game, and was not not where he said he was. And right after Susie disappeared, and the police would want to talk to him and his family, they finally got a lawyer, very high-priced lawyer, and that was it. Police can't, unless you have, probable cause, you cannot bother the person anymore. So basically, the victim has less rights than the perpetrator.
Yeah.
That sent up red flags for me.
Yeah. Let's move on to something else, and it has to do with, and this takes us to the ETM question again. That Rich and Suzanne had a favorite movie called Hackers.
That's
all right. And you told me about that the first time we talked. I've watched the movie. All right. I watched it from beginning to end, and I can tell you, I even took a few notes during it. Just to kind of run through my head after I was done watching it. It was kind of interesting seeing Angelina Jolie 21 years ago with she had this very boyish haircut, and it was very 90s. And being 25 at the time that the movie came out, it certainly brought back some memories. But there's a specific part in that movie that is relevant to this case. And it's almost like a weird coincidence, almost, if you believe in that sort of thing. In the movie, in the first quarter of the movie, the movie of Hackers is about these people, as you can imagine, young computer kids in high school, kind of like, I guess from my generation, would have been like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, going in and switching his grades. Well, these guys were doing a lot more than that in this movie. Right. And the one guy was bragging about getting into an ATM machine, hacking it, and causing it to spit out money somewhere. All right? And then here we have, just 3 years later, that movie came out in 95. In 98, you have Suzanne disappear, and the next day, that ATM in that store spits out that $20 bill. Right. And seemingly nobody saw anybody come in and use that machine. Now, granted, it wasn't caught on camera, but nobody remembers anybody using the machine.
Well, the police actually, when they realized the ATM machine might be, some factor, they were able to get about a half an hour before and a half an hour after that time frame, that 3:50, 10 minutes before, of all the people who used the machine, and they were able to speak with everybody. And that's how this Nike guy, the one they refer to as the Nike guy, was the only one that they could not identify right away. He was the only one, and that's why he became a suspect. And basically, he became a suspect because the boyfriend's family decided that he should be the suspect. And they were the ones who put up all the posters with his picture.
The boyfriend's family put those posters up.
Yeah, and they also bought a billboard with Susie on one side of the billboard and the Nike man on the other side. Can you identify this man? So that would throw any suspicions away from anybody else for a long time, and it did. That billboard was up for 6 months.
Now, it should also be noted, nobody saw Suzanne go in and use that machine that day. No.
And this was the other thing about that was it was about 2.5 miles from the campus. Susie wasn't much of a walker, and I don't think she would have walked down there. She did not drive. She didn't have a driver's license or a car, and in order to take a bus, it would have been out of her way to get a bus to that area. So I don't think Susie was there. I know she was.
Did you not also tell me the first time we talked that a branch of her bank is very close to there?
Right across the street.
So if she's going to go use if it was her that day, and maybe she had some sort of, let's just, some sort of, I don't know what, the medical term, but kind of just an amnesia or something like that. If she needed to use the ATM and could look at this card and say, well, I have this ATM, and maybe she knows the number, she would have gone to the bank, not to the...
She would have gone across the street, yeah.
Right.
Susie was smart enough not to spend any extra money if she didn't. And she had talked to me, actually, on my birthday, which was March the 1st, and she said how she was low on money. And if, I said, well, do you want me to send you some? Because I could have put some money in her bank account, because I had access to her bank account. And she said, no, she could wait till Thursday of that week, because that was the day she was going to get paid. And she still had enough, cash left in the ATM that she could take cash anytime she needed it. So, and also the other thing was, after she disappeared, there was a little jar full of money on her desk, full of change. So it was like, not a lot, maybe $8 or $9 in change that she used for the washing machine and probably for, candy machine or whatever. So, it wasn't like she was completely broke.
Yeah.
So, why would she go all the way down to this convenience store, about 2.5 miles from her campus when she had stores all around? And, across the street from the campus, there was an ATM machine in a bank that was her bank. So, I don't think that was her that did that.
I'll ask you this. Does the boyfriend have an alibi for where he was when the ATM was used? We know he has an alibi for the night before.
He claimed he was out looking for her.
Okay.
But we don't know.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Let's move on to something else. And once again, we're going to have to say for the record that nobody has been included or excluded from this investigation. Okay, that's why it's still unsolved 18 years later.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about, I know we had a wide-ranging interview the first time we talked, but I want to just keep it to this. The boyfriend's father assisted in the search for Suzanne. Okay? But what happened?
I don't remember saying that he did.
Well, I guess I'm trying to put this lightly. He started calling in, having sightings of Suzanne.
Oh yeah. He actually.
Can we talk about that? Do you feel comfortable talking?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He actually he would tell the police, how he was. I think at one time he was like an auxiliary policeman, whatever that means, in this little town or whatever. Big deal,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were waiting in a room at the campus, and one of the things that he said out loud was to his son, if you think you've met the police, regular police, wait till you meet the state police. In other words, they're the big guys, they're the ones that are going to really take over. So he was really kind of almost enamored with police-type people. So several weeks after Susie disappeared, he called the state police to say he said, I know what happened to Suzanne. I was driving down the road, and I saw a car that looked just like my son's car. Same color, same stickers on the car. Everything was exactly the same. He said, so I pulled up alongside so I could wave, and the guy that looked at me looked just like my son, but it wasn't my son. So he figured that night this guy must have gone to the campus, this fictitious guy.
Okay.
And Susie, when she got off he knew when she got off the bus, and, called her over, and she thought it was my son, and she got in the car with him. So that was his first story.
Okay.
Another story that he continued to...
Now, just for the record, how do you know that happened? Just the police told you that?
Oh, yeah, the police told
And
me.
there are police records in the state of New York right now that happened. Just, once again, for the record, for the listeners.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, please
The other
continue.
thing-
Okay, go ahead.
The other thing was he was a truck driver himself at the time, and he drove his truck to a small town about 25, 30 miles away from here called Amsterdam, Gloversville, Amsterdam area. And he said he would stop at this coffee shop every day that he drives the truck there. And he said, I'd see Suzanne sitting out on a bench just outside this coffee shop. Which kind of threw me for a loop there, because how in the heck would she get there? But anyway, he would see her sitting on the bench. So he told the police this. He said, I saw her at least 8 times. And so the police said, look, I'm going to give you one of our telephones. The next time you see her on that bench, you call us. We'll have a policeman there in 2 minutes. And so 2 weeks went by, and they actually had some undercover police following him around, and they saw he got on the telephone, and he called, and he said, she's out there sitting on the bench right now. And the other 2 police are saying, what's he talking about?
And the 2 cops are right there as well in an unmarked car, seeing what the father's saying, and they're seeing nothing.
Nothing. They saw nothing. So that was another sighting, debacle.
I'm going to guess that the calls probably stopped shortly after those sightings stopped shortly after that.
But he had one more where there's a college here in Schenectady. It's called Union College, and he claimed he was driving. It was like, I don't know, it was May or June, very hot day, and he said, I saw Susie in her long winter coat and boots walking through that campus in Union College. That particular day, he called the police to tell him that. Is he crazy? I don't know, but that was another one that,
Did you get to know him very well while Suzanne and Rich dated? Did you get to know him?
I didn't really get to know him very well. Susie did. I know she, they were going out, and they would see each other every weekend. Mm-hmm. And that was the one thing that was kind of unusual was the mother claimed that the father didn't know Susie very well. And I said, I got upset with her, and I said, how can you say that? She saw him every weekend that they dated. Mm-hmm. And there were times when, he would come out and try to, help his son fix the car, and the 2 of them were there. I said, she knew that. And then when we brought Susie down to Oneonta, he showed up with some carpets and things that Susie had stored, in a storage locker. The father, the mother, and the son all showed up at Oneonta. So it wasn't like he didn't know her. He knew her. So I don't know.
What you're saying is that the family of her boyfriend were helpful at times. I mean, they showed up and brought some things and.
Not that we asked them to.
No,
and I remember when they showed up at Oneonta, I said, I remember, we were going to take Susie out to eat after, and I remember seeing them show up, and I said to her right away, I said, there's no way they're going out to eat with us. You know that already, don't you? And she was, yes, I do. Okay. I said, okay, because I didn't care for any of them. And that was long before she disappeared. I didn't like them.
But just to be clear, for the record, what you're saying here is on the record, New York State police or local police stuff, these things that he did that turned out to be false sightings.
Yeah.
All right? Okay. This is not some, sour grapes or anything like that. Once again, I know you're telling the truth, but I just want to hear, I want to make sure my listeners understand that. Okay?
Right.
That's all I'm trying to do with this. Okay. Because as long as there is a record of that happening, then that's factual to me. What do you think happened to your daughter?
I really wish I could, look at a magic ball and say, I know exactly what happened to her. I really don't know. I know that she made it back to the campus that night. She was witnessed by a girl who was getting on the bus that saw her getting off the bus. And so I know she made it to the campus. From then on, I really don't know. My feeling is that her boyfriend or some member of his family came to the campus, and she knew them, and she would get in the car with any of those people, and something bad happened. I really don't know.
You know, the theme of this show, and I can't thank you enough, and we're going to continue on with some other things. We're going to move on to what you've been doing since. But this show, the theme of it is about transitional areas, about safety, being aware of your surroundings and things like that, because that was what really struck me about your daughter's case. And I told you from the beginning, this is still a case I think that can be solved. I think, with the right, sleuthing, investigation, cold case work, or whatever else. But with each of these shows, I try to teach the listeners about something. And I do think about women out there today, 2016, who, have their heads in their phones, and they set themselves up for being abducted, being attacked, being raped, and becoming a missing person. I don't think that's what happened in your daughter's case, okay? But she was in one of those transitional areas, moving from the bus to her dorm. Those are the places, those transitional areas. You'll see a lot of self-defense experts talk about that. So for any of you women out there listening, this is the stuff you really have to be aware of. I don't care if it's on a college campus, places that you're familiar with. If somebody has their eye on you and you're not paying attention to your surroundings, you could be setting yourself up. Now let's move on to what's been going on since. Talk to me about Suzanne's Law.
Okay. There are actually, I have two laws.
Please, tell us about them.
Yeah. Suzanne's Law, the first law that we passed was in it was called the New York State College Safety Act of 1999, and it actually became law in 2000. And it was an act to amend the education law in relation to requiring colleges and universities to implement plans for the investigation of violent felonies and reports of missing students occurring on their campuses. Basically, they wanted the police to actually have some sort of a plan in place so that if a kid went missing on a college campus, or if there was anything violent like rape or whatever, they were able to have a plan so that all police agencies would get involved in this. And that became a New York State law in 2000. And then in 2008, it became a federal law, and it's called the Suzanne Lyall's Campus Safety Act is a federal law now, and that was 2008 when that one was passed. In 2003, we had been working to try to get Suzanne listed with the National Center for Missing Children, but the National Center for Missing Children did not take children after the age of 18, up to the age of, they would only take them up to the age of their 18th birthday. So once you became 18, that was it. And we felt that students that, are in college or, graduate and up to the age of 21, they're kind of vulnerable. That's a whole vulnerable group.
Yes.
And we worked very hard to get a law passed. And in 2003, that law became Suzanne's Law.
Okay.
And it requires it requires police to notify the National Crime Information Center when someone between the ages of 18 and 21 is reported missing as a part of the National Amber Alert Bill. And so now what that law did is it actually raised the age from 18 to your 21st birthday. And now once the police make the call, they can call the National Center for Missing Children and get those children listed with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Right.
And the beauty of this law is that people who went missing before this law went into place, before 2003, can be grandfathered into the system. So I have one lady that I can put my finger on right away. Her son went missing. He was 20. He was at the Columbia University, and he went missing in 1972. And this woman never had any areas to look or search or any help or anything like that. And we got him listed with the National Center for Missing Children. So this man now is in his 60s, but he's still listed on their webpage as a missing person because he went missing at 20. So that's the beauty of this law. So I really feel that Suzanne's law put a lot of young people who never would have had any help, or the families any help with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
What was that process like? I mean, you've become an advocate now, and then getting involved with the politics, getting a law passed. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was it was interesting because when the first law passed in New York State, and I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty easy. I didn't know you could pass laws that easily. And people would say to me, how did you get this thing passed? I don't know if it was because she was an attractive college student that went missing that, the law passed right away or what. But then we found out that we really had to, become a non-for-profit organization in order to really have some, fight behind us, basically. So we became a non-for-profit organization to help other people with missing family members. And once we did that, it seemed very easy to talk to representatives or, federal representatives to see if we could pass another law or to even, get our campus safety law was 2008. And at the time, she now is New York State Senator, federal senator, but her name was Kristen Gillibrand, and she was a representative. Mm-hmm. And at that time, she hadn't passed a law yet. So we went to see her, and guess what? She worked hard with Charles Schumer, Senator Schumer, and the two of them passed the Suzanne Lyall Campus Safety Act in 2008.
That had to feel like quite an accomplishment for you.
It was a big accomplishment, and it was a big accomplishment for her, too. And the one that passed in 2003 was another one that we actually spoke with a representative, and he said he filibustered all night, and then the next morning he called us to say we passed the law. I said, wow, that's great. So it was, we said, I can't believe this happened. People would say to us, how do you get those things going? I don't know. It just worked. We hit the right people at the right time.
Yeah, you're not. These people aren't going to drop through the cracks anymore.
No, that's the way I look at it. And anytime I get a phone call from a family member that says, their child 18 to 21 has gone missing, I immediately get them hooked up with Suzanne's law and, to get a hold of the National Center for Missing Children. You have to have your police agency call, but it's a federal law. They have to do it now. And that helps them because, they can request posters if they need, posters. They can request investigators that are retired that will look at your case. They'll get a lot of help that they wouldn't have gotten had they, were not able to get into the National Center for Missing Children. If it's a child under the age of 18, they'll take them right away. But anybody over that age is 18 to 21, it's a little sticky.
Yeah, probably because a lot of those kids, they now have their independence. Some of them do leave the house on their own.
That's right.
They disappear on their own. In fact, probably if there was some study done, I'm sure you'd find that 18 to 21 age range is probably being most likely to just say, heck, I'm out of here, and it not technically be a disappearance. It's just somebody moving from New York to California.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you find families that have lost touch with these children, and then all of a sudden they say, wow, I haven't talked to so-and-so for a long time. What's happened to them? And then find out that they're no longer around, or they got caught up with, some bad situation that, they can't get out of, which is what happens to a lot of those young people.
I want to ask you a question. If you have some insight into it, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear you talk about it. You've turned Suzanne's disappearance into 2 laws. It's quite an accomplishment. We know of other parents, family members, for example, Kelly Murphy, Project Jason, who turned her son's disappearance into something very positive as well. On the other hand, I know, because I've taken interest in disappearances for years now, that there are many parents and family members who kind of go the opposite direction. That I, for example, can't even begin to tell you how many websites that are supposed to feature a missing person or something like that. You go to the website and the link doesn't even work anymore.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight into that? Why some people choose to go one direction and then it seems like other people go the other?
Well, there's some people that are real advocates, like Kelly, for example,
right.
Project Jason. When Kelly's son disappeared, there was nothing out there in Nebraska, where she was from, that was helping her, and she located us on a web page and called us and said, "Is it okay if I come out to see what you're doing?" And she made the trip about 2 or 3 times in a row, came every year to our Missing Persons Day, and then eventually Kelly decided to go out on her own and become her own advocate.
Yeah.
I know many other families who have, chosen to become advocates for the missing because their child went missing. And, maybe the time for us, 18 years ago, there really wasn't a lot out there for us.
Yeah, that's true.
And we just... we didn't know where to turn. We didn't know what to do. Maybe we were doing all the wrong things, but we didn't know, and we had nobody to ask. And so we just decided that we would become advocates for this. My husband was a counselor, and, he kind of knew that, helping people was the way to go. And we decided to turn our tragedy into something that would help other people so they wouldn't get so far down as we got in the beginning, just turn it around.
Do you think, though, that is the reason, some people, it hurts so much to think about it that, after a while, they just kind of want to move away from it, even if it is a son or daughter? Because I'm telling you, as a person, and of course, I don't have any children, but I hope that never happens to me with, my parents or, a family member. I don't wish that upon anybody.
No.
But so I'm not going to say I know how you feel. I don't.
No, but there's a lot of people who, and I think it's the same way as going to a funeral or a wake, and you go and you say you don't know what to say. So you say, oh, yeah, I know how you feel. But what happens with a lot of people is they want to tell you to move on, stop dwelling on it, get past it, you're not going to be able to do. Well, I don't care if that person eventually comes back being alive or deceased. It doesn't matter if it happens. The family is always going to have that hole in their heart. There's a hole there, and it never heals up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bottom line, is that sometimes some people have such a deep hole, they wind up getting divorced. They can't cope with each other anymore.
Yeah.
They have health issues. They have drinking problems, drug problems, because that's the only way that takes the pain away for them. And, I don't like to hear that, but I do hear that a lot.
Yeah,
I hear that a lot. Families that just haven't been able to cope. I mean, they're strong for a while, but then they just lose it after a while. They don't think that there's any more hope. I mean, that's the reason why we, started our organization.
And the name of your organization, please.
It's called the Center for Hope, and hope meaning healing our painful emotions. How do you come up with something to add to that? But that's what it is. It's really painful. It's the worst pain that you can experience. Every little thing around you reminds you of that person that's disappeared, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, and then there's no closure. Well, I don't even like that word, closure, resolve in any of these cases, because when a person dies, they have a place to go to grieve that person. There's always a gravesite or something. But with a missing person, they have nothing, which is why we have Missing Persons Day once a year. And in New York State, we have a monument for missing people.
And where is it? Where is it?
It's right in downtown Albany, right next to the New York State Museum.
Okay.
It's 20 feet high. It has a perpetual flame at the top. And around the base, which is 8 foot by 8 foot granite base, it says, as a symbol of our eternal hope, may this flame light their way home. And I have to tell you, there have been many times when I've been down there to that monument where there's a poster there, a stuffed animal, flowers. People go there and sit and grieve. Yeah. They have a place to actually feel that missing person. There have been candlelight vigils at that monument because people, have somebody who's missing, and it's the place they want to go and have a vigil, just because they're hoping that kind of publicity will bring that person back.
Yeah. Now, Suzanne, she had at least one other sibling, right? You have a son?
I have a son and a daughter.
And how did that affect them? I mean, what?
It was very difficult for them, although they were grown up. Susie was our youngest child. My son was 12, going on 13 when she was born. My daughter was almost 9, going on 10. And so, they were kind of like second parents to them. My son adored her. He'd take her to the concerts when she got to be her, right age.
Yeah, your daughter, Suzanne, was a Rush fan.
She was a Rush fan.
I like Rush myself. Yeah.
And she had about 23 CDs.
Wow.
Of Rush before she disappeared, which I was amazed because she was really into Rush.
She had really good musical taste.
Whenever Rush came to, our local area here in Saratoga, SPAC, my son would take her. He didn't want her going to concerts by herself. So he would take her. Just to tell you the age difference, when he went to his first year of college, she was going into first grade.
Wow.
To give you.
Yeah, well, you should know, I don't know if I told you that the first time we talked, but I have 2 brothers and a sister who are quite a bit older than I am as well. I actually have a sister my brothers and my sister are all almost 20 years older than I am. So
there you go.
I know, yeah. So was the baby.
Kid.
Yeah.
Yep, the baby, and everybody treated her,
Yes.
kind of that way, and, it was hard for them. They were a little bit older, but I'll tell you, when I talk to families who have a child that's gone missing, and I'm saying child because everybody is somebody's child. I don't care who it is. if you're 55 years old and you go missing, you were somebody's child at one point. But anybody who has a child that has gone missing and has young siblings, I usually tell those families, please, do something with them, even if it's to take them out for an ice cream cone or something. Don't let them feel neglected, because you become so focused in trying to find the missing person that you forget about the siblings. And I have heard stories about siblings who have, I know of one who committed suicide after how many years of the family being so focused in trying to find the young sibling that she couldn't cope anymore. She just couldn't handle it anymore. So it's very difficult for them. They don't say anything, but they do feel neglected.
Yeah.
So.
Well, to wrap this up, what else should be covered here? Where can people reach you, my listeners? You have a nonprofit organization. Do you take donations?
Yes.
What else do you want to talk about?
Well, we can be reached at it's called the Center for Hope. We're in upstate New York. We're 20 Prospect Street, Ballston Spa, New York, 12020. I do have a web page, which is Hope, the number 4, themissing.org.
Okay, Hope for the Missing with a 4 as the numeral 4.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. .org, and I can be reached by telephone, which is also on our webpage, but I'll give you the number. It's 518-884-8761.
Okay, great.
And those telephone calls that come into the office, we take them as they come in, because I get about maybe 30 or 40 a week. Missing people, so I have to take them as they come in.
Can I ask you, are you working on any legislation or anything right now? Do you think that's behind you, or you think you are going to do something even more regarding politics?
I think I would like to, look at some other things. We haven't, actually one of the things that we did do, we kind of got out of the legislation area for a while, and we produced decks of playing cards with 52 missing person cases on the cards, one on each card. The cards were passed out throughout New York State to the different jails. And I think we've had over 30,000 cards out there, 30,000 decks of cards. We also produced coasters that were sent out to the different bars and restaurants in the Capital District, and we picked out people who were missing through the Capital District for our coasters, hoping that if somebody had a drink and loosened up a little bit, on the back of the card there's a place where they can either text or scan and make a phone call to a place. So, we got out of doing some legislation because we were involved in the cards and the coasters. But there are other things that need to be, resolved, and
there's still holes. There's still holes in the laws that you'd like to see closed.
Oh yeah, there's lots of holes, and like I said, I think from the time Susie disappeared to now, so much has happened for the older group of students, the older group of people that, through our laws. I often get a phone call from an organization saying, if it wasn't for Suzanne's law, this lady or this person would not have been able to get their child listed with the National Center, and, an Amber Alert wasn't, sent out or whatever. So, it does make me proud. And unfortunately, my husband is no longer with us. He passed away last year, and so it's a little harder for me to do things, but I'm still trying. I'm still working at it, and I will until I find my daughter.
Okay. Mary, I can tell you, I'm going to be praying for you. I hope that my listeners,
so much.
I hope my listeners are praying for you, if that's their belief system. and I know we're all going to do what we can to try to get this resolved for you. We're not going to say
Okay.
closure, but we're going to say resolved. Okay?
Okay, yes, that's the word you want to use. You do
Resolved.
never want to use closure with a family with a missing
Right.
person, because there's never any closure if you think
Yeah.
about it. It's not the same as when a person dies from a disease or natural death.
Right.
That's closure.
Right.
It's not.
Mary, I've deeply enjoyed this interview, and I can't thank you enough for spending this time with me.
Well,
All
I
right.
thank you also for even interviewing me. That's great.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that was my interview with Mary Lyall, mother of Suzanne Lyall. According to iTunes, the entire episode aired for the first time on September 24th, 2016. But my recollection tells me that it was published before then, and then I had some problems with the file. I deleted it, then uploaded it again like a week later, hence the September 24th, 2016 date. Mary was the first person I ever called in regards to a case for Unfound. I must have called her late July of last year, 2016. And I continue to talk with her to this day. She's been so helpful to the program, I really can't even begin to explain how much. For example, if you found the cases of the McDaniel sisters and Craig Freer interesting and compelling, you can thank Mary Lyall for making those interviews happen. And I'm sure you'll be hearing some other interviews facilitated by Mary before this year is over. As for Suzanne's disappearance, it's of course still unsolved. And my views regarding her case are no different now than they were then, and my opinions mirror Mary's. That Suzanne's boyfriend and his father know more than they've let on over the last almost 20 years. I hope you will check out Mary's nonprofit organization, Center for Hope. You can find it at hopeforthemissing.org with the 4, F-O-R being the number 4. And if you know anything about Suzanne's disappearance, I hope you will come forward. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.